Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our look through this book, the Benedictine Daily Prayer, a short breviary. In the last video, we took a look at the office of lauds, the morning office, not the nighttime office of vigils. We'll get to that separately. We took a look at lauds, and we took a look at flipping between the ordinary of the Liturgy of the Hours, which contains kind of the overall structure of the hour of lauds, and then the Weekly Psalter, which contains the hymn and the psalmody and material that pertains to the day of the week in this 4-week cycle, weeks 1 and 3, weeks 2 and 4 of the cycle. So we took a look at lauds. If you watch that video, the third video in this playlist, and that seemed to make sense, then we're just going to go through Vespers and Compline and the little hours, because they're all pretty much the same. So Vespers, if you see once again, let's take a look at the ordinary of Vespers. It'll be very much like the ordinary of lauds. The structure is very much the same. So lauds was on the ordinary of lauds began on page 814 in the book. The ordinary of Vespers is on 829. And structurally, they're very similar. There's an opening a set of versicles, which are the same as the one in lauds. Then there's a hymn. Then there's psalmody, 4 psalms for Vespers. And then a short reading with a responsory that goes along with it, a little set of verses, kind of a call and response, verse and response. And then the Magnificat. In lauds, we had, if you remember, the Benedictus, which comes from the Gospel of Luke. Lauds always has the Benedictus from Luke's Gospel, both in English and in Latin for those of you who want it. And Vespers has its own corresponding canticle from the Gospel of Luke, which is the Magnificat, Mary's song. Again, also in English and then in Latin. Following the Gospel canticle, as it's called, is the litany, which is just a series of prayers for our needs and the needs of the world, followed by the Our Father. Again, 2 different forms as well as in Latin, just like in lauds. And then a concluding prayer and a final blessing. Structurally, like exactly the same as lauds, right? If you were looking through lauds a few pages before, you'd see pretty much exactly the same structure, just with 1 or 2 changes, a different gospel canticle, the Magnificat for Vespers, as opposed to the Benedictus, the canticle of Zechariah for lauds. And also lauds began with Psalm 67, which is just kind of like a call to prayer, a call to praise. While Vespers, on the other hand, just jumps right into the hymn and then psalmody. So structurally, it's just the same. We'll take a look just very quickly at the structure of the little hours, and we'll see a similar sort of structure for terce, sext, and none, what they call the little hours, the daytime hours. And these happen on essentially the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th hour of the day. So you start the day at roughly 7 in the morning, kind of when you get up and get going. Then 3 hours later will be about 10 a.m. 6 hours later will be about noon, 1, and none will be about 3 in the afternoon. So mid-morning, midday, and mid-afternoon. And these are known as the little hours because they are short. It's just basically a couple of psalms and a hymn, and that's it. And also in the Benedictine tradition, because they're basically the same 5 days out of the week. Sundays and Mondays are the exception. Sundays and Mondays, they have their own psalms that go along specifically with those 2 days. But for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the office is just found entirely as it is here in the ordinary. And structurally, it'll sound very familiar. So for terce, we have an opening versicle, and then a hymn, and then psalms, these 3 psalms, with one antiphon that covers all 3 of the psalms together. And then a reading. Here's the reading with its versicles afterwards, the responsory. And then a concluding prayer with a concluding blessing. Sext, the midday office. Opening versicles, a hymn, 3 psalms. What would you expect to see after it? You're getting the pattern by now, right? A reading, followed by a responsory, a call and response set of verses, and then a concluding prayer, and then a conclusion. Guess what you're going to see in known? Here is known, the mid-afternoon office. Again, opening versicles, a hymn, 3 psalms, a reading, followed by its responsory, and then a concluding prayer. So you begin to see the basic pattern of the offices, which is that there's usually some sort of, it opens and closes with some verses. Now we are beginning to pray, thanks be to God. And then a hymn gets inserted into there somewhere, usually right at the beginning. And then there's always a set of psalms, 3 psalms for most of the offices, more psalms for lauds and for vespers, and even more psalms once we get to vigils. A reading, some sort of response at vespers, and at lauds there's then the intercessory prayers, which where we're asking God, praying to God, to Jesus Christ for some specific intentions. And then a concluding prayer, and then a concluding set of versicles or a concluding blessing. So structurally, you've now got the pattern down. Anything that you can't find in the ordinary, you will find in this first level of understanding. You'll find it in the Weekly Psalter. So just as we did for lauds, when we get to Vespers, we'll be flipping back and forth. It'll say hymn, and then in italics, it'll say the hymn for the respective day in the Psalter is sung or recited. And here, if today, for instance, is Monday in week 1 or week 3, here's the hymn for you. We go back to the ordinary. After the hymn, we have the psalmody. 4 psalms with their antiphons are given in the Psalter. And here we are Monday Vespers, and we have 1 psalm with its antiphon, a 2nd psalm with its antiphon, a 3rd psalm with its antiphon, which actually is the 3rd psalm for Monday of week 1 is actually 2 short psalms that they treat like 116 and 117, or in the older numbering 115 and 116. Doesn't matter. It tells you, just go straight through and tack on this shorter psalm. The shortest psalm in the Psalter, by the way. And then the 4th psalm block really is this one here. Following that, we go back to the ordinary, and we see that after the psalms, we know we have our short reading. The short reading differs depending on whether it's week 1 or week 3. So for week 1, here is the short reading with its responsory. For week 3, here is its short reading with its responsory. Now remembering that the Weekly Psalter has weeks 1 and 3, and then after it, we have weeks 2 and 4. So we'd be looking, if it was week 4 this week, we'd be looking for Monday, Vespers, week 4. And there we have that. Right. Back to our ordinary. After the short reading and the responsory, we have the Magnificat antiphon, and it tells us that it's taken from the Psalter. And here it is. There's the Magnificat antiphon. So we read this, and then we have the Magnificat itself in the ordinary on page 830. Again, either in English, or if we want to tackle the Latin, that's provided as well. And antiphons always go on either end like bookends. So we say the antiphon at the beginning, then we say out loud the Magnificat, end it with glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, etc. And then come back and read the Magnificat antiphon again. And every day of the week will have its own Magnificat antiphon. Most of the major feasts and memorials and solemnities that we'll get to later will have different Magnificat antiphons. Then, in the ordinary, it says we have the litany, just as we did in Lauds, a little set of petitions that are calling upon God for various things. And here it is, the litany. So we just read that out loud. The litany ends with the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer. Then, back in the ordinary, we have the concluding prayer, which is from the Psalter, unless a season or feast has its own. So by default, here we are back in the Psalter. There's a concluding prayer. Sometimes there are, now let's see if I can find an example. Sometimes there will be 2 concluding prayers, and it'll say, pray this one or that one. I wonder if I can find any examples of that. Should have looked that up before I told you about it. No, I can't find one right now. If there are 2 concluding prayers, it'll say, here's one prayer or here's another prayer. And in that case, you can just pick. You can just pick the one you prefer, or assign one to week 1 and one to week 3 and alternate between them. Either one. Anyway, back here into the ordinary. After the concluding prayer is this final blessing, which is actually also replicated in the Psalter itself, just to save you a page flip. So that's Vespers. We've basically looked at terce, sext, and none, because, like I said, on Tuesday through Saturday, everything you need for terce and sext and none is found just right here in the ordinary. It doesn't change from day to day. So you can just come here and pray it right through. However, on Sunday and Monday, the Psalms get varied. And also for different seasons or feast days of the year, there might be some variations. So you do have to pay attention to the rubrics, to these bits in italic that will tell you some details. And what is needed, what you need, will be found here in the Weekly Psalter or elsewhere when we get to the rest of the book. So, for instance, Monday at terce, it begins just as it does in the ordinary with, O God, come to my assistance. The hymn is here. It's the same hymn, but they've just printed it in both places. Come, Holy Spirit, ever one. But in the ordinary, it then gives you 3 psalms, the 3 psalms that you pray Tuesday through Saturday, Psalm 119, 120, and 121, but not on Monday. On Sunday and Monday, in the little offices of terce, sext, and none, you're working your way through Psalm 118, 119 in some Bibles, but that's the longest of the Psalms. It's got many, many, many verses. And so what happens on Sunday and Monday for the little offices is that you basically work your way through that psalm. And so just the psalm is different. These 3 psalms for Tuesday through Thursday here in the ordinary, Tuesday through Saturday here in the ordinary, But on Monday and on Sunday, there'll be a different set of psalms provided for you. So you should just always have your ribbon set on whatever day of the week it is. And if the ordinary says everything you need is in the ordinary, then you stay in the ordinary. If it says on Mondays and Sundays what you need will be found in the Psalter, then you have your ribbon set on the day of the week in the Psalter. So there it is. Those are the little offices, terce, sexton, none. And you're beginning to figure out this pattern between the ordinary and then the weekly Psalter and how everything is provided for this basic pattern of just following the days of the week. So if that's all you did, you would be able to follow lauds, terce, sext, none, vespers for every day of the week over a 4-week cycle. The Psalms would rotate every 2 weeks, but the little readings and a few other things would vary over a 4-week cycle. So you would be able to get pretty far just with a prayer practice just on those, just working from the weekly Psalter and from the ordinary. You'd be able to develop a pretty good and stable prayer life just with that. The rest of it is just adding in seasonal variations, variations for feast days, variations or additional material for the one of the 2 offices we haven't looked at. We haven't looked at vigils, which is the longest and most complex. So if you just focus on the ordinary and figure out how to use the weekly Psalter, if you just figure out these 2 ribbons in the middle, in my case, it's the blue ribbon and the kind of burgundy, maroon, pinkish, that one. For the ordinary and the weekly Psalter, you just figure those 2 out and you are, I won't say 90% of the way there, but you're a long way there. You've got the pattern down. So we haven't looked at 2 offices. We'll leave vigils for another time, but I'm going to talk to you now about Compline, the bedtime prayer, which is very stable and very fixed, but there are some things that you haven't seen yet. So here's Compline. It's in the ordinary on page 833. And really, it doesn't vary much at all. There might be some seasonal variations or some slight variations depending on significant feast days. I'm not actually sure. I personally, to be honest, use Compline from a different book, but Compline is very similar across the whole Christian tradition. Compline that we have in the 1979 Book of Common Prayer is very similar to this one. Compline in the Roman Catholic Liturgy of the Hours is very similar to this one. So Compline is bedtime prayer, and you'll see some very similar elements all the way through it. It's an office, which means there are going to be psalms, there's going to be a reading, there's going to be the Lord's Prayer. There's going to be these opening and closing versicles. In fact, let's begin there. So in Compline, it begins as all the other offices do, except for vigils. We'll get to that. O God, come to my assistance. O Lord, make haste to help me. Glory to the Father and to the Son, etc. The Alleluia in parentheses, by the way, means the little parentheses is a cue to just kind of keep a watch, keep an eye out that you don't say Alleluia during Lent. So they always put Alleluia in parentheses just as a little reminder. Say it, unless it's in Lent. In that case, don't say it. Anyway, so following the opening versicles in Compline, there's one of the variations, something that you don't see in the other offices, and it's a brief examination of conscience. Now, if there are a couple of options there, if you're Roman Catholic and you're used to the several short confessions that are at the beginning of Mass, you can use those. If you are Episcopalian and you have any of the forms of confession that we have, for instance, there's one in both Rite 1 and Rite 2 of the Eucharist. There's a form of confession that's found at the end of Prayers of the People, Form 6 in the Prayers of the People. And we also have our own form of confession in our Compline service in the Book of Common Prayer. So you can use any of those, or you can just use the one that's provided here. And just an opportunity to review the day, to offer up our confession for what we have done wrong, what we have left undone, and to call upon the saints to pray for us for forgiveness. So after that opening confession, the examination of conscience, then we have, uh, not surprisingly, we'll expect to see what? We'll expect to see a hymn, then we'll expect to see psalms, then we'll expect to see a short reading with a responsory, and that's what we'll see. So here's the hymn. The hymn's always the same for Compline. Then the psalms. One or all of the following three psalms are prayed daily without an antiphon. And these are going back to the time of St. Benedict. He asked for these three to be the Compline psalms. There's no antiphon in Compline. You just pray one or all three. And I know some people they'll do Psalm 4 combined with Psalm 133, or they will do Psalm 90, because that's about the same length. That's about the same length of psalm. Psalm 90 is fairly lengthy. So you can just alternate between those two, or pray all three, whichever. And you end with all the psalms together with the glory to the Father and to the Son, etc. After the psalms, you expect to see a short reading, and sure enough, here we have two options for a short reading. You can just pick and choose, alternate between one or the other. Use one for certain seasons and the other for certain other seasons. You can use one for Sundays and one for the rest of the other days of the week. It's your call. After the reading, there is a responsory. And then, just like we had in Lauds and Vespers, we had a gospel canticle. If you remember, we had in Lauds we have the Benedictus, which is Zechariah's song, and from Luke's gospel. And in Vespers we have the Magnificat, Mary's song, also from Luke's gospel. In Compline, the gospel canticle is the Nunc Dimittis, which is the song sung by Simeon, again in Luke's gospel in Luke chapter 2, when Mary and Joseph bring the infant Jesus to the temple, and Simeon holds Jesus in his arms and then sings this song, which many people think is this kind of the summary of Simeon's life. And he's now basically saying, Lord, I can die in peace. You've given me my heart's desire. And so we join with Simeon in saying this prayer of release, ultimately, right before we go to bed. We've done what we came here to do. We've received the graces and the goodness from God, and so now we ask to go in peace. So this has an antiphon followed by the canticle. It's much shorter than the Magnificat or the Benedictus. That's fine. And it's also provided in Latin if you want to tackle the Latin. And then we say the antiphon again. So we have a gospel canticle here in Compline. Then we conclude with the prayer. Every one of these offices has a concluding prayer. And that's the same day in and day out. And then it concludes with one of two blessings at the end. So one of the purposes of Compline, I don't know if it's one of the purposes, one of the characteristics of Compline is that it's stable. It's in the monastic world, Compline is typically just, it's prayed at nighttime, right after night has fallen. People go to bed early in monastic communities because they get up early. But it's still dark, usually, when people are praying Compline. And so in most monasteries, it would be something that you have memorized because it's the same day in and day out. You memorize it fairly quickly and you come into the chapel in the dark, maybe there's just one single candle burning in front of an icon of the Blessed Virgin Mary, or in front of a crucifix or something. And you pray these bedtime prayers in the dark with your brothers or sisters, and then you go to bed. It's very peaceful if you ever get to experience it in a monastery. But it's one reason why there's so little variation. It's this actually, with having several different readings, um, provides more variation than Compline typically does in the monastery. But at the very end of Compline, for those of you who wish to participate in this, for those of you who are okay with Mary, I am. Not every Protestant Christian is, but I come from well, I love Mary, so there we go. So at the end of Compline is typically, historically, traditionally sung or said one of the Marian antiphons. And those are provided here at the end of Compline. There are 4 of them, just little hymns of thanksgiving and honor to Mary, which typically kind of ends the day in a monastery. You can choose to ignore all of this if it makes you uncomfortable to honor Mary in this way. But if you want to, then there are both Latin and English versions of all 4 of these. There's actually 5 because they've included the Hail Mary, which is a prayer to Mary. It's usually not one of the Marian antiphons. The classic Marian antiphons are the Salve Regina, made famous in Sister Act, the movie, and then Alma Redemptoris Mater, which is the one typically done in Advent and Christmas season. Ave Regina Caelorum, which is typically associated with Lent, and Regina Caeli, which is typically associated with Easter. For some communities, they will just sing or say the Salve Regina, Hail Holy Queen, throughout the year. And so you can conclude, if you want to, if you feel blessed to do so, you can conclude with a little bedtime nod to Our Lady. Then on page 2016, you can join in with some Benedictine communities around the world. There's a prayer for a happy death, which in some communities is typically recited before bedtime, and that's on page 2016, right at the very back. And then a concluding prayer: may the divine assistance remain with us always, and with our loved ones everywhere. Just a nice way to remind, to say goodnight to all of our loved ones wherever they may be. So thank you for joining me with this review of the Little Offices and Vespers and Compline. Now you should have, apart from vigils, you should have the ability to pray, to figure out all of the liturgy of the hours for the basic weekdays of the year, weeks 1 through 4 in this cycle. So get started with that, practice that. Figure out which week it is and what the day is. And again, there's charts right at the very beginning that will tell you what the week number is according to the Sunday of the year. Leave comments if you have any questions that I can answer. I think next time I will tackle vigils with you, and then we'll have all of the offices figured out. Then we'll dive into the cycle of the year, the seasons and the feast days, and what we do with solemnities and feasts and memorials. Leave comments or questions in the comments here on this video, and I'll do my best to answer them. I hope this is helpful to you. May God bless you and keep you, and bring you many blessings as you learn this new skill of praying to Him and with Him. God bless you. See you next time. Bye for now.